Hello and welcome to Chess Books 52. I thought I'd look at some of my oldest books. These aren't necessarily particularly thrilling, but before I do, I just draw your attention to this publication. To be honest, I don't know if it still exists. I used to see it in Smith's. There is an article here about old chess, which, whilst it isn't necessarily particularly up to date, is of some interest to us, perhaps. I'll just go through it and see if I can find it. It's probably here somewhere, isn't it? Page 42. That's where I started. It's on page 42, everybody. So turn to your ready reckoners. Here we are. It's by Rupert Neelands. And it tells you about the early start of chess literature, which doesn't really have any logical link to a present day. The relevance isn't there. It talks about documents as long ago as 1525, printed in Rome in 1527. Picture of the king on the cover. There he is. I don't even know which king it is. Let's find out. Sure. It is the High and Mighty Monarch Charles, by the grace of God, of Great Britain, France, and Ireland. Well, he was pushing his luck with the France bit, wasn't he? The royal game of chess play, sometimes the recreation of the late king, with many of the nobility. And here's the famous chess play with the S's as F's. Sometimes see that on gravestones, don't you? But it's unusual, at least to me, to see it in a book. The brilliant young champion was French, must be referring to Philidor. And his great work on the game, demonstrating the importance of pawn structure, first appeared in his native language under the title L'Analyse des Échecs in 1749. But Philidor's patrons at the time were English, and what proved to be the most successful chess book ever was published in London, an indication that French and English interest in the game had finally coalesced. Well, that's interesting. And he has a very detailed summary of all the books and their values, none of which seem to go below £100. But it's just round figures, isn't it, really? Starting in 1617, Pietro Carrera, The Game of Chess. There we are. And of course, we must go back to Caxton if we're to look at the first things printed in the English language. Well, now, having said all of that, let me show you some of my books. Here's a very odd book. This book is enough to trouble anybody. The Minor Tactics of Chess. There it is. Young and Howell. Now, it's very important to stress this has nothing to do with the two English grandmasters called Howell. This was published 110 years ago. The Minor Tactics of Chess, a treatise on the deployment of the forces in obedience to strategic principle, by Franklin K. Young and Edwin C. Howell. And it is a Cato, or even Chato, and Windus 1910 publication. And it is absolutely crap. But he has his own way of dividing up the chessboard and talking about the various maneuvers, John Nunn calls them. And as a player, I did some reading up on him last night, knowing I was going to speak today. He wasn't that bad. He locked horns with quite a few strong players, including Steinitz. And there we are. Look. So the notation's a bit funny, but well, all you can say is if somebody mentions Young to you, at least you'll know who they're referring to. There we are, the minor tactics of chess. Well, here's something a lot more mainstream. It's also something that's a lot more valuable, at least to me. There, the Modern Chess Primer. Da, 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 da. It is by the Reverend E. Cunnington, M.A. Not everyone that gets their qualifications printed on the spine of their book. This is quite charming and was published in 1899. When thou with study deep hast toiled over dulled thy brain, then use this game, which will refresh thy wits and it again. That is from the famous game of Chessy, 1614, which unfortunately isn't here. I'm just waiting for the t-shirt. Here's a problem by B.G. Laws. With the study. No, I think it's a problem. There we are. That's rather good, isn't it? But I like the edging. This is several books put together, which subsequently were split asunder. How to move the pieces, the openings. There we are, early chess. Let's look in an old book about even older books. The literature of chess is enormous, running into thousands of volumes. I've got them all. Nothing is here attempted, save and mention a few books, mostly English, easily attainable and like to help the reader who may wish to study the matter in greater detail than can be given in a work of this kind. And it begins with James Mason's Principles of Chess. And I'm hesitating now because I might actually have that. I've got several by James Mason. Now, it's very important for me to stress that James Mason, or even his real name, and he is not related in any way to James Mason, who is not related in any way to the actor James Mason. He mentions Lasker's Common Sense in Chess is the substance of 12 lectures, an attempt to deal with all parts of the game of chess by the aid of general principles. I think Lasker went a bit far with that and to keep on talking about common sense the whole time, but all of that. Mr. Pretty's ABC des Échecs. Chess Openings, Ancient and Modern. I used to have a copy of that. Like a fool, I let it go. Good old Freeburg and Rankin, mentioned by Fisher in 60 Memorable Games. And as Fisher would also say, probably best left there. Hastings Tournament by Mr. Horace Cheshire, who invented the Cheshire cheese, the pub frequented by Samuel Pepys. I just said that for a joke. A cheap selection of books. Social Chess, I've also got that. You're in for a treat. Have that later. It's a collection of over 100 lively, brilliant games, widely representative players and openings, including odds. I should explain, in case you're a bit new to chess, that odds mean that you don't start with the same line of pieces. Some of the pieces are taken away from you at the start, before you start. To hopefully even up the game. I don't know that it makes it any better or worse. It just makes it different. The games of the St. Petersburg tournament, 1895-6, by Mason, that's James Mason again, and Pollock. The games of the Steinitz-Lasker Championship match, that would have been the World Championship match, is 1 and 6 from the editor. Well, I used to be the editor of BCM, and I haven't got a copy of it. But what do I know? Two Move Problems by B.G. Laws. That was the one I was showing you with the frame around it. Laws, one of his anyway. Among the many magazines, the British Chess Magazine. It's 8 shillings yearly from Trubner and Co. London. La Stratégie, 20 years, Nummer Pretty Paris. These are published monthly, containing chess news, noted games, problems, and other matters of interest. Well, the most important matter of interest is when is it coming out? Because that's the question which all editors, who are always late to the crease because they've been working so damn hard, are frequently asked. Now, here we come to reprint. The noise in the background is my washing machine and not Doctor Who's TARDIS landing in my kitchen. This is nothing very exciting. I got it for about a penny or something. And it deals with straightforward mates and also tells you the names of the pieces in foreign languages. There we are. I think it was Graham Strauss who said that if you have a cat, it's a good idea to give it a short name. So when you're calling it in for its food, you don't have to, say Skoborowski. It takes too long to say. Oh, look, there's nice old diagrams. And the pages are not too yellowed or ripped. I mean, you can see it and you can understand it. Look at that. I can never hold things still, can I? But there we are. And it talks about the openings and tells you their names, most of which wouldn't be used in modern parlance, but it's still a good idea to know them. And here's the basic mates and end games with 1 pawn each. Let's face it, good chess is good chess. And there's examples of grandmasters of the time, masters of the time playing, and it's in columns in English descriptive notation. So there we are, chess by R.F. Green. I don't know who R.F. Green was. Perhaps he was a former editor of the British Chess Magazine. I know the feeling. Robert Frederick Green. Well, Mr. Green, I apologise. Your fame did not precede you. Here's a nice little thing. I used to have several copies of this, but we're down to one now. It's by Peachy, and it was brought out on the wave, and it was a considerable wave of interest generated by Hastings 1895, which was up until then in history the strongest and certainly the most important tournament as opposed to chess match ever, and of the 19th century. Definitely, it stands out. It's a small book, but it does contain quite a lot of information about openings of the different phases of the game. The end game presents perhaps the most attractive features. I'm glad to hear it. It explains about stalemate and how to mate with a rook and a king against a lone king. Quite frankly, little books like this are worth their weight in gold. I bought this in a long defunct bookshop in Portsmouth, I think. Mr. Purkis. There's also a chapter on drafts. The latter is the older game. Drafts is older than chess. The eminent authority was Sir W. Jones. The former is about 4,000 years old. What? W. Jones is 4,000 years old. Well, you should have the day off then. If drafts proceeded, and in the foundation of chess, its antiquity is very great. Both games, however, came from the ages when war was the chronic state amongst mankind, and seem to show that the moments of peace and recreation were utilized to keep alive the idea of conflict and conquest. Well, that's an amazing statement, isn't it? Both games, however, came from the ages when war was the chronic state among mankind, and seemed to show that the moments of peace and recreation were utilized to keep alive the idea of conflict and conquest. Well, Mr. Peachy, I don't think I can follow that, and I'm not going to try. Now, earlier I was mentioning several times, and in jest, Mr. James Mason. Well, here he is. He was Irish. Nice cover, isn't it? There we are. And it says on it, price 2 shillings net. Well, I don't know what I paid for this, but I tell you something, it wasn't 2 shillings. It's been given away as a prize in the Hampshire Telegraph. Did you enter? Solution tourney of 1897. And it was published by Horace Cox in 1897, and it's just called Chess Openings. Well, there's nothing wrong with that. This treaty is designed for readers who are already chess players, at least insofar as them being well acquainted with the rudiments of the game. Of the chessboard, the lines or squares upon which the forces originally deposed, together with the parallel to them, are called, ranks. And here are, lest we forget, the ranks. See that? It talks about the bishop's opening, beloved of Tim Harding and Bent Larson and Bill Hartston and various heroes of mine like that. There it is. I think this looks very interesting. Mason was an extremely strong player, so it's not that it was. He would have also played against Lasker and Steinitz and all the players, Amos Byrne and all the players of his age. I've got a book, which I haven't got with me at the moment, James Mason in America. And boy, did we want him back. Section on the French defense. The French defense is adopted in anticipation of the eternal Lopez and may be considered one of the best methods of eluding that wearisome game. In other words, play pawn to king 3 and not pawn to king 4. Not sure I agree with that, but for all of that, there's no point in poo-pooing his book. Talking about the classical French. Quite frankly, a lot of this stuff here would set anybody on an even keel to the middle game. Here's a book I bought some years back, Chess for Beginners by R.B. Swinton. Very faded. This is the 1897 edition, and it was originally in a hotel, in the way that in the old days, possibly now also, guests were given things to read. I paid £2 for this. I think I did rather well for £2. It's got charming adverts for other things. Golf in the year 2000. Well, better hurry up then. Chess for Beginners and Beginners of Chess. It's published by T. Fisher Unwin of Paternoster Square. Here are some old pieces. With their names in. I don't know what language. Persian. I'm talking about Caxton and chess are so connected to people's minds that it seems appropriate to put him forward first before going back to the earlier period. It's the second book printed in England, according to the late Mr. Blades, Caxton's Game and Play of Chess-E. There we are. The best way of learning chess or anything else is to find out an agreeable person willing to teach you, using a book for after reference. Well, this is an excellent book, and the chapter heading is The Corner Squares. So have I seen a king at chess, his rooks and knights withdrawn, his queen and bishops in distress, shifting about, grow less and less, with here and there a pawn. And those are the words of, you'd guessed already, Dryden. Into the origins of the naming of the pieces, and it shows an early checkmate. Instance of checkmate by white. There it is, queen swinging in and mating the hapless black king, who, despite having a full array of pieces, can't defend himself because he's weakened his king's side irrevocably. A section, this could be extremely valuable to somebody, about Chinese chess. The Egyptians seem to have been looking up recently. The author of the article on chess in the new Chambers Encyclopedia, which I can only imagine is still with us, and far away in the remote ages before Lewis Island walrus ivory men, and I've mentioned them several times earlier, haven't I, of the 13th century, and before Charlemagne's men, the actual Egyptian draftsman, so termed in the British Museum, among the mummies, together with a bit of a board. A bit of a board. And he's certainly gone into some detail here. And quite frankly, a lot of this could be reproduced today. And I think it would find an audience. Not a large audience, but it can only, in a way, build on to what we know. Talking about Chaturang, the early forms of the game. Talking about Sanskrit. As to some of the old chess pieces, they would have required, if used in actual play, squares of 4 inches to stand and move upon, and boards correspondingly large. In France, the very early mention of the game centres upon a story of the King Pepin, the greatest of that name, who lived in the latter half of the 7th century. Well, King Pepin. That's Pepin. Forgive me. Any amount of folklore here. And in the back, any amount of adverts for other things. A Cyclopedia of Architecture. This is a very scholarly book. It's also very detailed, over 200 pages. If you see it, get it. Chess by Peachy. And here we are. You seldom stray far from the game. Another book by James Mason. This is more what you would call for fun. It's social chess, and it gives games at odds, and also it doesn't actually give the names of the players, I don't think. Well, it says the name in brackets of the winner, but the vanquished are spared the indignity. I'll just show you because it's rather nice format. I like it. The printing is clear, and being by James Mason. I like the cover too. There we are. Would only have cost me a pocket money price, but that was probably about 30 years ago. Now I would think this might be worth £10, £8, I don't really know. And it's all complete games with notes by players like Hoffer, Thorold. There's a game even won by Napoleon Bonaparte, and if you believe that, you believe anything. And Steinitz won the Battle of Waterloo. Here we are with the Principles of Chess by, do you know? Do you know? By James Mason. The Principles of Chess in Theory and Practice by James Mason is the second revised edition from 1896. Harmoniously uniting in itself the curious, the beautiful, and the true, chess appears to hold a permanent relation to the innate susceptibilities of intelligence, and there is now little question of its increasing value as a mental recreation. Glad to hear it. And here is the chessboard, in case you've never seen one before. Very nice printing, isn't it? It's nice and clear. And it deals with all the openings: Queen's Gambit, French defense, Sicilian. They never quite got the 19th century, never quite got the hang of the Sicilian, it has to be said. It needed the rise of the Soviet school. And they were all peasants in those days. Well, they don't, well, aren't now. Particularly large diagrams, which old eyes, which I'm acquiring to say the least, appreciate. There we are. Well, I will not linger long because there's quite a lot else to see. This is Chess for Beginners, edited by no less a person than Henry Bird, who played for the World Championships. I didn't realise he was quite as good as he was. He was an old, this is rather interesting. This is just from the last turn of the century. This was given away a prize to a soldier. It's been engraved with suitable élan. To Sergeant Peakman from C Company, 1st Battalion, the Rifle Brigade of January 1902. So that's 120 years old, nearly anyway. And it's by Henry Bird. It says, author of chess openings and chess masterpieces. It's been repaired. It shows the game of chess and with some photocopied sheets. I don't mind about that. The defense derived its name from the late Monsieur Petrov, the distinguished Russian amateur with whom it was a special favorite. That's true. It was adopted without danger, but in the opinion of the best authorities, it is scarcely so satisfactory as knight to queen, bishop 3. I think it means as a response, not as an opening move. I can't argue with a lot of this, I'm sure. With a very fine game, it says. Have I got any coffee left? That's a drop. I won't hold this up to the camera because I can only repeat. Oh, there's an advert here for Gunter's Modern Confectionery. You might like to see it. There it is. I'll have a look at it. He's a biscuit baker, a practical illustrated guide to the latest and most improved methods of making biscuits. Icing, fruit in brandy, sounds delicious. Liqueur cups, I'd like that too. Cakes, candies, caramels. A fancy paper cover for 6pence. Confectionery, pastry, preserving. It's not every book title that has 2 commas in it, but that did. The opinions of the press. A judicious selected vocabulary, clearness of definition, and compactness of arrangement. Good. This is Corbett's pad blotter, dictionary, and desk folio in one. And it's 10 and 6. Well, you're not going to stretch to that, are you? And writer's ready word reference, kept in 3 sizes. Yeah, I don't know if you can see that. But if you want that, I don't know that you do. I do, the page is falling out. We'll get it before the page falls out. There it is. Here's something much more up to date, which bears the imprint of F.D. Yeats. So that is not messing about. This is a much more recent book. I know it doesn't particularly look it, but it was. And it was the old half a crown, 2 and 6. Maybe I should say the old half crown. Deals mostly with traps in the openings, I think. Pitfalls in the openings, yes. This is more of a refresher, I would think, rather than a basic textbook. Deals with the Petros, Ponziano, Giocopiano, My beloved French. Shows you a Greek gift and shows the good old Gled Hill attack. Well, if you don't know what the good old Gled Hill attack is, get out your Tartakova, because it is there. Here's a similar sort of cover. Well, it's exactly the same. I suspect they got this printing press out for the surrounding edges and then printed on the front whatever they wanted for the edition. And this is by Gunsberg, who, like Bird, did actually play a World Championship match. This is like a little MCO in as much that it has columns and some explanation. It's modest and falling apart, but it leaves a bit of love. There will always appear to be a certain halo of romance surrounding this debut. And this is the Steinitz gambit. E4, E5, knight C3, knight C6, F4, E takes F4, D4, Queen H4 check, and King E2. The king's strong peace proclaimed Wilhelm Steinitz. Except he said it in probably German, in English, but with a German accent. The king's strong peace. Anyway, here we are, pass on. Here we have a truncated version of Staunton's handbook. I've got better Staunton's handbooks, which I may show you at some future date. But this is the last one I'm going to show you now. This cost me £1. And here's an advert for the Staunton pieces from Jacques of London. Now, I think that Jacques of London, in some form or other, are still producing, turning out pieces. Aren't they beauties? Even then, I'm sure they came at a price. Yes, they did, up to £13. Imagine that, 110 years ago. The in statu quo chessboard has supplied to HM the King of Spain. Well, there we are. Ian Lopez have a lot to answer for. This book being intended only for beginners. But I'm reading it from them. It is divested of whatever might appear perplexing. Well, that's good. And examples for study are taken in the order which will make them easy and comprehensive to the student. Well, if you're the student, and I think you are, then you'll know where to come. I leave the last words with Staunton. The longest game between kings, rooks, and knights, and those belonging to the queen, in the registered chessmen, the king's rook and knight are distinguished from the same pieces on the queen's side by a small crown stamped on their summit, renders them peculiar adapted to the purposes of chess analysis, semicolon, and is of itself sufficient, we hope, to entitle them to the preference of those amateurs who are seeking to improve their play. H. Staunton. Well, this has been Chess Books 52. I'm James Pratt, and I'm off to watch Prince Philip's funeral on television. Can I wish you a very happy afternoon?